Look, I know the Bruins were missing three of their top defensemen last night, but what the heck was that?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Wednesday, January 29th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today we are discussing the storylines, stats, and signals from last night's 7-2 loss to the last place in the Eastern Conference Buffalo Sabres. Boston's up and down season continues, and we're going to look at it all here coming up in a moment. Before we get into that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been covering this team for various outlets for 20 years. I spent 5 years working at The Score in Toronto, covering all things hockey. I've been hosting this podcast since 2019 from the comfort of my home in Guelph, Ontario. Shout out to the Storm, Matt Potter's junior team. And I'm just like an hour and a half away from Buffalo. It's not the closest NHL arena to me. That would be Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, but it's far more economical and easier to get to than driving into Toronto to get to Buffalo. And I'm so thankful in hindsight that I did not brave the snow yesterday, the wind, and the border hopping in order to go watch the Bruins lose by a score of 7-2 in Buffalo to the last place in the East, Sabres. Shout out to those in Southern Ontario who made that trip. I know there are a ton of Bruins fans who do hop the border, go watch the Bruins play in Buffalo, maybe go to Cheesecake Factory or Chick-fil-A before, hit up Target. But man, I'm glad I did not make that drive last night to witness what we saw in Buffalo. Yes, the Bruins were playing without Charlie McAvoy, without Hampus Lindholm, without Brandon Carlo, who was shelved due to illness, probably something he picked up from Trent Frederick, who missed a couple games recently. Obviously, some bugs going around these days, and the Bruins were not spared. A lot of us feeling pretty ill after watching that game last night. A 7-2 loss to the Buffalo Sabres, in which both Tage Thompson and JJ Peterka recorded hat tricks. The first time that's happened in the NHL this season. And it did happen twice last year. The Wild did it. The Blues did it. And the Bruins just flat out kind of embarrassed. The first time it happened for the Sabres since 2008 when Derek Roy and Drew Stafford recorded hat tricks in the same game. Brad Marchand said afterwards that the Bruins obviously are desperate right now, can't afford to have games like this where they're not prepared. They need every point. He said the Sabres are a better team than what their record shows. Can't take that team lightly. They're extremely skilled. Some of the most talented players in the league. He said, quote, "You need to come prepared to play and ready to compete harder than that." So the captain with a bit of an indictment on the effort that the Bruins brought into it and perhaps taking the Sabres a bit too lightly. Now, that's not great when you're down to your, you're relying on three defensemen to step in and play above their station, perhaps. Last night, the defensive pairings were Nikita Zadorov, Andrew Peeke, Michael Callahan, Jordan Osterley, Mason Lohrei, Parker Witherspoon. That's Witherspoon, who's normally like your seventh defenseman. Callahan, Osterley, generally should be in the AHL. Peeke usually plays on the bottom pair. So guys playing well above what is expected of them. But still, you've been playing without Lindholm and McAvoy for several games now and had done pretty well. They just beat Colorado on the weekend. Yes, it was after that big trade. There were emotions running high in the Avalanche locker room. But still, you have to take care of the Buffalo Sabres if you are serious about being a playoff team. And as we'll look at some of the stats here in a couple moments, it's becoming glaringly obvious that the Bruins, despite hanging around in the standings, aren't really a high-level team in the NHL this season. Interim coach Joe Sacco said he didn't like the way the Bruins managed the game last night. You're going to make mistakes in hockey. They happen in the course of a game, but it's how you respond after those mistakes. A couple of goals that the Bruins scored, the Sabres come out and respond right away. They have to be better than that the next shift. And game management was probably the most disappointing thing for the Bruins tonight. They were up 1-0 in this game after Mason Lohrei gave them a lead in the first period. But they allowed the Sabres to tie it. They allowed them to go ahead. And then it just continued to snowball from there. Marchand did narrow the lead to 4-2 at one point with a power play goal. But 30 seconds later, JJ Peterka made it 5-2. And he completed the hat trick to make it 6-2 with an empty netter. The Bruins had pulled the goalie very early in this one to try to salvage something, make a bit of a comeback, but it was, of course, too little too late. And the Bruins, big picture now, it's embarrassing to lose to the Buffalo Sabres. You can't afford to drop points to a team that is that behind you in the standings. And the Bruins now have a much worse goal differential than Buffalo. They're now back to 15th with a minus 25 goal differential. The Sabres jumping up to minus 15, 3 spots clear of the Boston Bruins. And as we'll see here when we look at the stats section, the Bruins now sitting in 9th still in point percentage in the East, but with a few teams really hot on their heels, including the New York Islanders, who have won 5 in a row, 8-2 over their past 10. They're not that far off either. We'll take a look at these stats and signals to take away from last night's game here as the podcast continues. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, and endless possibilities. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, for a while now, we've been hearing about Cam Neely discussing 2 paths forward for this team, whether or not they believe they can compete for a playoff spot and when they get into the playoffs, or whether or not they should be retooling after a disappointing, well, we're not just the start, we're well into the season at this point. Let's take a look at some numbers here for the Boston Bruins. When it comes to goals for per game, the Bruins are sitting at 2.71, which is 27th in the NHL. That's their offense at the moment. If you look at goals allowed per game, the Bruins are allowing 3.17, which is 23rd in the NHL. Their power play is clicking at a success rate of 13.8%. They did get a power play goal last night. That's good for 30th in the NHL. And the penalty kill is succeeding at a 75.8% success rate, which is 25th in the NHL. None of those stats scream playoff team to me. They're all well in the 20s and some even in the 30s. If you look at the 5-on-5 stats for the Boston Bruins, you look at save percentage. They were top 3 in the NHL over the past couple of years in terms of save percentage. This season, save percentage, 5-on-5, they're coming in at 14th, which is 91.64. Their shooting percentage is 8.69, which puts them, 21st. If you kick that up to all situations, all strengths, so total in everything that has happened so far this season, their save percentage comes in at 88.91, which is 23rd in the NHL. Shooting percentage, which comes in at 25th. So they're not a particularly good defensive team. Jeremy Swayman has had his struggles. He has looked pretty good as of late, but again, last night, allowing several goals. They're a below 50% team when it comes to shot attempt differential. When it comes to shot differential, they're under 50%. This is in all situations. It's important to look at 5-on-5. Where are they in terms of shot attempt differential at 5-on-5? Well, they're 23rd. Shot differential, and this is all according to Natural Stat Trick. They rank 25th. When it comes to high danger chance opportunities, they rank a bit better at 18th. And when it comes to expected goals, which is kind of adding all the shot attempts, shots, the quality of shots, the Bruins rank 19th. So none of these numbers suggest that they are even a playoff team, and B, that if they are able to squeak in, that they could make some noise in the postseason. They are well outside the top 16 in all of these key categories. The only thing keeping them somewhat hopeful right now is the fact that the rest of the Eastern Conference has been pretty up and down so far this season. If you look at total points, the Bruins are indeed a top 8 team. Right now, they are 7th, in fact, with 56 points. However, they've played a conference high 52 games. So they've had more points available to them than many other Eastern Conference teams. The Lightning, the Islanders down at 49 games on the bottom end. So most of the teams that are chasing them have games in hand. So if you look at point percentage, the Bruins now have a record of 25, 21, and 6. That's 25 wins and 27 losses. So they've earned 53.8% of all available points, but 6 of those have come in losses. The loser point doing a lot of heavy lifting for, well, anybody who's a playoff hopeful. When it comes to, again, point percentage, they're behind Columbus and Ottawa, both of whom would be in wildcard spots at the moment. Tampa is technically behind Ottawa, but they have a slightly better point percentage because they've played one fewer game. The Bruins are being chased very closely by the Detroit Red Wings, who've won 3 in a row. They're at 53% in terms of point percentage. The Canadiens are at 53%. The New York Rangers, despite having lost 2 in a row, are back up to 520 or 52%. The Islanders have won 5 in a row. They're at 52%. Even the Flyers are at 51%. The Bruins are in real danger here of dropping back to 500 or below. Only the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Buffalo Sabres, who the Bruins lost to last night, have worse point percentages or are below 500, I should say. When it comes to goal differential, the Pittsburgh Penguins have bottomed out at minus 40, and they're likely going to be selling off some assets. The Bruins are now at minus 25, which is much worse than Philadelphia, who's next closest at minus 19. The Canadiens are minus 18. The Sabres, after last night's win, are at minus 15. There are 8 teams with positive goal differentials in the Eastern Conference. That's generally a indicator of being better than the rest. Hockey's pretty simple when you boil it down. I've said this many times. You want to score more goals than the opposition. And if you do that more regularly than not, you'll have a positive goal differential. Columbus and Ottawa right now are at +1. Then you have the top 6 teams, clearly the top 6 teams in the East. Toronto at +10, Florida +15, New Jersey +26, Carolina at +31, Tampa +32, and then Washington way ahead at +55. So even if you sneak into the playoffs, maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. You're looking at the signals, but say the Bruins finish in the first wildcard spot, that means they'll be taking on Toronto or Florida in round 1. Is that a team that you think you can stack up with? I mean, probably not. At this point, it's very unlikely that the Bruins would be able to match up with one of those teams. Yes, LOL, they always seem to be able to beat the Maple Leafs in the playoffs. Of course, we know the problems they've run into with respect to the Florida Panthers. Last night, they were outshot 10-5 in the first period, 33-27 overall by the Buffalo Sabres, who went 1 for 3 on the power play. The Bruins did go 1 for 2, but just so leaky defensively, allowing Buffalo to score very quickly after you get on the board. Again, they went up 1-0 at 12:44 of the first period. Less than a minute later, the Sabres tied it. Then Marchand scores to bring them to within 2 goals. JJ Peterka scores 30 seconds later, and then they got an empty netter, a very late power play goal to make it 7-2. Just not a great night for the Boston Bruins at all. Jeremy Swayman, 32 shots, 26 saves, and 813 save percentage last night. There was only one defenseman who wasn't a minus last night, and that was Parker Witherspoon, who skated 21 minutes and 27 seconds, the second most among all Bruins. Mason Lohrei, the only defenseman with a point last night. Among the forwards, there was only 3 who were not a minus last night. John Beecher, Cole Koepke, Justin Brazeau. Not a great night, really, from anybody. David Pastrnak only had 2 shots on goal. He had 1 assist. Marchand leading the way with the 1 goal, 4 shots, a block, and a hit. He was probably the best Bruin last night, but he said it best when he admitted the Bruins just did not bring it last night, and you cannot afford to drop points to a team like the Buffalo Sabres. We'll take a look at some more signals to take away from last night's game, as well as take a quick look ahead at what's coming up next this week. What can the Bruins take away and perhaps rebound from that? We'll look at that all here as the podcast continues. It is so cold outside, but I cannot stop thinking about going to baseball games or concerts this summer. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience as well that brings fans together. Game Time has everything you need to get tickets for your next event. It has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Again, I was looking at Game Time to look at Sabres Bruins tickets last night in Buffalo. Browsing through the deals was simple. I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The super deal was really impressive, offering the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout made the experience smooth and reliable. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets at the lowest price guaranteed. So perhaps it's just time to admit that these Bruins are not very good. Beyond time, really. And while I don't subscribe to what I'm seeing on social media this morning, which is a suggestion that the Bruins should trade Jeremy Swayman before his no-trade protection kicks in on July 1st. Again, going back to yesterday's episode, I think he's one of the untouchables on this team that you want to build around. He's not having the best season, but at the same time, it's his first year without Linus Ullmark, dealing with a new partner, new relationships, all the drama over the summer. Missing training camp is the biggest thing there. I think after a more normal summer, he should bounce back. And he's already showing that this season. He's had some really good games as of late, last night, notwithstanding. But having said that, I really, really, really do think it's time to take a look at some of the kids you have in the system and analyze whether or not they are pieces moving forward. With all due respect to Vinny Lettieri, for example, I say send him back to the AHL and recall Georgi Merkulov to see if he can give you a bit of a boost offensively and mitigate mistakes, be responsible defensively, so you can assess whether or not he's a piece moving forward. Fabian Lysell is a bit younger, and therefore you can be a bit more patient with him. But a guy like Merkulov, 24, he's done everything you've asked of him at the AHL level. Put him in the lineup and see, A, if he can improve your offense, improve the power play, but also see if he's a core player moving forward and give him some valuable experience down the stretch as they continue to fight for a playoff spot. Nobody's saying here just throw in the towel and completely tank, because even if you're in a playoff battle and you don't end up making it, you still have that playoff mentality that's already kicking in. That's valuable to learn at this stage in a young career. Anybody who's not going to re-sign, or it's becoming clear that they're not going to re-sign, you have to entertain offers. Find some players elsewhere that, like a Morgan Geekie, for example. Perfect example of a guy that the Bruins took a bit of a chance on, and he's stepping up and proving his worth, proving his value, and proving that he's an integral part of the team moving forward, or at least an integral secondary part of the team moving forward. Trent Frederick, on the other hand, not super impressive here in his contract year. He's a guy that would draw some attention in trades, especially for a team looking to add some toughness heading into the playoffs. You've already got Mark Kaselic signed. He is younger and brings everything you want from Frederick, and really even more this season. So those are the kinds of things that you can look at. Whether or not it's Don Sweeney who's architecting this retool remains to be seen. There's very real questions to be asked about the moves that were made this past offseason, committing to Elias Lindholm, almost $8 million a year. He's already relegated to the third line center position. Is that Sweeney? Is that Cam Neely driving that bus? Probably the latter, but the Jacobs family must decide if they're going to keep the keys in their hands. Again, very few general managers are afforded firing 3 head coaches, all of whom are Jack Adams Trophy winners, 2 of whom are Stanley Cup winners. If they are to bring in someone else, surely that would be his last hire as a head coach before it becomes apparent that the issues on this team run deeper than who's behind the bench. It's personnel driven, it's philosophy driven. Getting bigger over the offseason may not have been the best approach. They wanted to be built for the playoffs while ignoring the fact that they perhaps did not have a playoff level roster on their hands to begin with. So the Bruins, again, remain technically in a playoff spot, but not really. They're very low ranked in terms of all sorts of key metrics that you look at: goals for, goals against, penalties, or power play, penalty kill, shots, save percentage. They have a tough game coming up against the Winnipeg Jets next tomorrow night on home ice, a team that just pasted them 8-1 last month in Winnipeg. And then they will go from there to take on the resurgent New York Rangers on Saturday afternoon before hosting Minnesota Wild without Kirill Kaprizov. He's going to miss the next 4 weeks after undergoing surgery. Then you play those Rangers again. That could be 4 big points on the table in terms of swinging the playoff race. And then you enter the Four Nations break with a game against Vegas next Saturday. So by this time next week or in 10 days, we could have a real better picture of where the Bruins are going to go after this. I really need to check if there's trades possible during that Four Nations break. I don't know if there's a freeze or not, but I'll check on that and get back to you for tomorrow. For today, very disappointing result last night, but maybe it shouldn't be really seen as disappointing. Maybe this just is who the Bruins are: a wildly inconsistent team, bubble team in the Eastern Conference, and probably either destined to miss the playoffs or if they squeak in a quick one and done. And any other illusions above that, it's just wishful thinking at this point, in my opinion. Anyways, I hope you all have a great day. Please do take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. Right now, the Bruins have a 37% chance of making the playoffs, according to Dom Lucian of The Athletic. Perhaps the best course is to keep calm and Bergeron. 37% chance. That's not nothing. Anyways, we'll be back tomorrow to break down all the latest on the black and gold. Hopefully, the return of Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm to the lineup. Maybe there'll be some moves or trades along the way. Keep it locked to Locked On Boston Bruins for all the latest, because that's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Have a good one, friends.